The Taliban has officially declared victory in Afghanistan after all U.S. troops left the country and ended America's longest war. Taliban fighters celebrated the announcement in Kabul last night. America's exit marks an end to 20 years of war and bloodshed in Afghanistan. But there's growing fears and uncertainty among many Afghans still living there as the Taliban takes charge. I want to bring in Secunder Kermani in Kabul. He's a Pakistan and Afghanistan correspondent with our partners at the BBC. Thank you so much for joining us, Secunder. First off, we saw members of the Taliban celebrating, this video of them celebrating at the airport. But I'm curious, what is the mood in Kabul now?
Yeah, we saw that celebratory gunfire from the Taliban lasting late into the night. Then today, the Taliban taking over, visiting Kabul airport, inspecting some of the military hardware left over by the US forces there. Although that hardware really largely decommissioned, we understand, according to US officials. The Taliban, unsurprisingly, have been declaring today a great victory following the departure of US soldiers. This is, of course, something they've fought for 2 decades. Elsewhere in Kabul, though, I think we're still seeing a continuation of this air of uneasy calm that we've seen in the city for the past few weeks. Many people waiting and watching to see what the Taliban do next. Many people I've been speaking to say the Taliban have adopted a more conciliatory tone in public than they had anticipated, but they're worried that may not necessarily last all that long. They're waiting to see what type of government emerges from all this.
Well, that was going to be my follow-up question, because, the end to the longest U.S. war does not mean peace in Afghanistan. What are the concerns about the Taliban actually forming a functional government that will allow for freedoms and will be able to give the people of Afghanistan the basic things that they need?
Well, absolutely. I mean, on the one hand, you're alluding there to issues or concerns about women's rights, human rights. When the Taliban were in power in the 1990s, women weren't allowed to get an education, weren't allowed to work. They've said this time that it's going to be different. But there's still a degree of skepticism amongst many people here. And that's partly because we've seen vast differences in Taliban-controlled territories across the country. So I spent time in the past in Taliban-controlled areas in the north where they seem more, let's say, progressive in that they allow and they're in favor of female education. In the south, where things are much more conservative, we understand that in many places, girls are not allowed to go to school beyond the age of puberty, beyond the age of 12. So there's a degree of uncertainty and anxiety, I think, beneath the kind of sense of everyday calm that you can sometimes see in places like Kabul, where shops and restaurants are still open, but everyone's waiting to see what happens next. And many people, in fact, not even necessarily waiting to see what happens next, but leaving the country. I was at a bus stand in Kabul yesterday. Their employees telling me the number of people heading to the borders with Iran, Pakistan have doubled, if not quadrupled, in recent weeks.
So let's talk about that, the people who are leaving the country. We've been told that there are about 200 or so Americans that are still left. I'm not sure about citizens of other countries who may or may not want to get out. There is a cash shortage. People are lining up at ATMs hoping to get money out. Right now, I presume the airport is not up and running. So what do we know about, whether or not the Taliban will be able to get the airport up and running? Not everyone's going to be able to drive to the border. Can you give us any insight as to how things might unfold for the people who are still in Afghanistan and want to get out?
Yeah, lots of people who still want to leave, including I've been speaking to former US Army interpreters, former British Army interpreters who hadn't necessarily got permission because they hadn't progressed far enough in their applications for visas. Others who had got visas and had been told to go to the airport but simply weren't able to get through the kind of frenzied crowds that we saw in the past week or so. So these people have real concerns and no real idea about what to do next. When it comes to Kabul airport, we understand that the Taliban are in talks with both officials from Qatar and Turkey about trying to get it up and running again. A number of Western countries have been talking to the Taliban and saying that if they want international legitimacy, one of the key issues they're going to have to agree to is allowing the safe passage of those Afghans who want to leave the country. The Taliban will want to get the airport up and running, not only to allow people to leave, but also to allow much needed aid and medicine to come in.
Yeah, great points. Secunder Kermani, thank you so much.